We begin through the looking glass.
Why is everybody so obsessed with the President of the United States that they can't even begin or finish a sentence without mentioning his name 5 times? It's kind of weird.
That's an interesting question to try and answer. Part of the issue is stories keep evolving, like when the president's son met with Natalia Veselnitskaya at Trump Tower.
The Trump Tower meeting itself is at least evidence of you better investigate. How is it not?
Well, because the meeting was originally for the purpose of getting information about Clinton. The meeting turned into a meeting.
Which in itself, it's attempted collusion. I understand.
No, it's
you
not.
just said it. The meeting was intended to get dirt on Hillary Clinton from a Kremlin lawyer.
No.
That was the intention of the meeting. You just said it.
That was the original intention of the meeting. It turned out to be a meeting about another subject, and it was not pursued at all.
And even the question of whether the president played a role in drafting a statement about that meeting has changed from no to yes. Those specifics are damning enough. But the overarching reality is that this administration repeatedly insists that you are entitled to your own facts.
You're saying it's a falsehood, and they're giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that.
I think it's very important to point out that in a situation like this, you have over time, facts develop.
Fact counting is anything. We've never had anybody with the level of mendacity that he has. Not even close. But we'll leave it
it's
there.
It's in the eye of the beholder.
No, facts are not in the eye of the beholder. You're always welcome here to argue the case.
Just remember, what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening.
Truth is truth. I don't mean to go like...
No, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth. The President of the United States says, I didn't...
Truth isn't truth. Mr. Mayor, do you realize what...
No.
This is going to become a bad meme.
Don't do this to me.
Don't do truth isn't truth to me.
Joining me on set, chief correspondent for The Washington Post, Dan Balz, NBC's intelligence and national security reporter, Ken Dilanian, former special assistant to the president and former press secretary for Vice President Pence, Mark Lotter, and White House reporter for The Washington Post, Sung-Min Kim. Thank you all for being here. I hardly know where to begin on this evening. But Dan Balz, since you have spent many years, watched many presidents do this, have you ever seen before this kind of dissembling around what is true and what is not true in your time as a reporter covering Washington?
No, and I don't think anybody has. I mean, we've seen presidents who have dissembled occasionally. We've seen administrations that have lied. We know that is sometimes part and parcel to the way they approach things. But we've never seen it on the scale and the consistency of this White House and this administration. And I think what we saw with Mayor Giuliani today was just another example of that.
I think we actually have, if I can ask my executive producer, Ben, to play that clip again of Giuliani.
Truth isn't truth.
One more time.
Truth isn't truth.
Yeah, just so we're clear. Mark Lotter, do you agree?
What I think is
It's a yes or no question.
Well, what I think Rudy Giuliani is talking about is that sometimes we have a lot of facts that are brought together to create an incomplete and not accurate conclusion. We've seen this time and time again.
Does this administration, I mean, when you take an oath, you sit down in front of a jury or a judge or at a congressional committee, you say, I promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Is that a statement that can no longer apply in government? Because if you listen to all these things that many administration officials have said, it sure seems that way.
I think what you're saying, though, is that you can take the facts, and facts are facts. But if you reach a wrong conclusion by stringing a bunch of them together, then that's still the wrong conclusion. And, I mean, in a way, it's like a Dan Brown novel. We're picking a bunch of different facts to create an entertaining and fictional conclusion. And I think that's what Rudy Giuliani is getting at.
I don't think that the argument there was that anyone was trying to say there was already a conclusion, but rather that there have been several very specific events that have facts associated with them. The administration has said one thing, and then another thing has turned out to be true. Right?
Yes, there have been times when the information has changed and the story has changed.
Okay. So I want to kind of dig into this a little bit further, just because I think it's really important, because this level of casualness with the truth has permeated all levels of our politics. There is Texas Congressman Blake Farenthold, who resigned after using government money to settle sexual harassment claims. In a deposition and documents obtained by the Huffington Post, he claimed, quote, "the F-tards won." And when the Republican governor of Texas asked Farenthold to pay for the special election to fill his seat, Farenthold responded complaining about, quote, "the deep state, fake news, and being a victim of a political witch hunt." Then there's the case of Melissa Howard, running for a state house seat in Florida. This week, her campaign said reports she did not actually have a college degree were fake news, and posted to social media, quote, "the truth shall set you free," before distributing this photo of herself with a diploma. Then Miami University of Ohio stepped in and said, no, she really doesn't have one. Doesn't have one. Doesn't exist. Days later, she withdrew from the race. Seung-Min Kim, you and I are on Capitol Hill most days talking to lawmakers, a wide variety of whom, have decent relationships with the truth. What's your sense of how much this erosion of what we can believe and what we can't is really setting in?
Well, I think there's clearly has been a rising distrust in the media for a while. I mean, let's be honest, the press doesn't always have the highest approval ratings with the public. But I do think that there is this rising skepticism from the public about what we are disseminating, what lawmakers are telling us. And a lot of that, frankly, has come from the president. This was something that he did during the campaign, using the media as his foil, calling us fake news. We saw in one of the clips earlier in a recent public event, he said, don't believe all you hear. So I think that, lawmakers are seeing the president's tactics towards the media, and, several of them are adopting it as their own.
Ken Dilanian, how much of this has a real impact on kind of how the Mueller investigation is going to play out? I mean, it does seem as though some of what this administration is trying to do in muddying the waters about the Mueller investigation is sinking in with the public.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm back in college, because the left, when I was in school, had a philosophy that the truth was relative. It could be influenced by your identity, racial, gender. There was the conservatives who hated that argument. Now the conservatives have adopted that there is no one truth. This is a pretty cynical game, in my view, that is all aimed at what you just described, which is discrediting the Mueller investigation for the audience that matters, which is the Republican base and the senators and House members who are elected by that base, who are going to eventually decide potentially on an impeachment motion and more importantly, a conviction in the Senate, which requires 2/3.
Casey, can we go back to Giuliani for just a minute?
Sure.
I mean, when he was talking with Chuck on the program this morning, he was, I think, trying to say that Jim Comey says the president told him to lay off Mike Flynn and the investigation. And the president says, no, I never said that. So he's saying, well, there's no truth, but that means there are two sides to a story. But there is truth. I mean, one of those people is telling the truth, and one of those people is not telling the truth.
Or maybe they're both lying, and there's a third version. But there is something that actually
there is truth, and I think that when Mayor Giuliani does what he does today, it is, as Ken says, it's an effort to muddy everything and to discredit, as opposed to what he did as a prosecutor, which was to get at the truth.
And just as an aside, you know who does that and is masterful at it? The Russian government and the Russian intelligence services. That is their whole game against the West, is to suggest that nothing you can't believe what you see in the media. There's relativism, it's whataboutism, there's no truth. They do it all the time. And now the right, the alt-right is adopting that in our politics.
Mark Lauder, you want a last word response, or would you prefer we just move along?
No, I mean, I think, but I think there is some relative that we do have to take a look at, and I think we all hold a certain amount of blame in this. I'll go back in October of last year, where, and I'll pull it off here. The George Papadopoulos plea agreement was significantly enormous. It was more problematic than the Gates and Manafort indictments. He had already given up 4 other people. Those were all things that were being talked about for 24/7 on cable news after the fact of a plea deal. Now we know this week it was all insignificant. So we've got to be careful when we get into areas of prognosticating what we think is going to happen and what things mean. and we find out the facts later are wrong.
Is that true?
I wouldn't say it's insignificant. I think he didn't cooperate, and at the end of the day, they couldn't trust what he said, but they have his emails and his phones. That's what we learned in the plea agreement, and so it's not clear that they need his testimony. They know about his interactions with the Russians, and they know who in the campaign he shared the information that the Russians had Hillary Clinton's emails.
Right, and if anything, that is an argument to wait for Robert Mueller and his team to gather all the facts and then present conclusions, while the president's team is clearly trying to prejudice exactly what American voters feel about those conclusions before any of us have them. Anyway, we should move on now, because meanwhile, President Trump and his legal team are firing back at the New York Times after the paper reported that White House counsel Don McGahn has been cooperating extensively with Robert Mueller's obstruction inquiry. Just out tonight, the paper reports, quote, President Trump's lawyers do not know just how much the White House counsel, Donald McGahn, told the special counsel's investigators during months of interviews. Mr. McGahn's lawyer has offered only a limited accounting of what Mr. McGahn told the investigators, according to two people close to the president. That has prompted concern among Mr. Trump's advisors that Mr. McGahn's statements could help serve as a key component for a damning report by the special counsel, Robert Mueller. Here's Rudy Giuliani again on Meet the Press this morning.
John Dowd yesterday said, I'll use his words rather than mine, that McGahn was a strong witness for the president. So I don't need to know much more about that. They don't have collusion or conspiracy, as Brennan pointed out. And
how do you know that? Well, you say this always so definitively. How do you know they don't?
I know they don't because look, this whole McGahn thing leaked from them. If they had some kind of evidence that there was collusion or there was obstruction, don't you think it'd have been leaked? I mean, they leak everything else.
I mean,
Ken Dilanian, what's, in your view, kind of the significance of what we now know about the McGahn testimony? And while, yes, the White House had been arguing as recently as this morning that they were fine with it, there were still information down in that story, the first story at the Times, that McGahn thought he was going to potentially be being set up.
Absolutely. That was a jaw-dropping story. If they were fine with it, they didn't read the story very carefully, because it made clear that Don McGahn sees himself as the White House counsel, a lawyer protecting the office of the presidency, not Donald Trump, and that he was worried that Trump was trying to set him up. So he made a decision to fully cooperate with Robert Mueller, went in there with his lawyer 3 times, some 30 hours of interviews, and the White House does not know what he said. But the story suggested that he talked about those episodes where Trump was pressuring him to fire Mueller, and he was resisting because he knew it was improper. That could be very damaging, and he's the only witness that can give Mueller, the sort of intimate details of those exchanges. Could be very important.
Yeah. Dan Balz, were you surprised by this? I mean, the John Dean comparison in particular, I mean, you've sort of seen this kind of arc play out. That's a pretty striking historical comparison.
It is. To have the White House counsel, in a sense, cooperating fully, even if blessed by the White House initially, with the special prosecutor, and now to recognize, as they seem to tonight or earlier today, that they didn't really know everything that he had to say, puts him in a very, very difficult position. I mean, I think it is a reminder that the president's legal counsels throughout this, the ones, not the White House counsel, but his personal, have not served him well. Almost from start to finish, and whether it was the original team or now Mayor Giuliani, things are said, things are done, and they come back and they cause them problems in the end. So I think this has to be very worrisome. We don't know whether he will turn out to have been a good witness for the president, or whether he will have undermined the president. But if you are in the president's situation right now and you don't fully know what happened between those two, you've got a problem.
It has to be nail-biting, to say the least.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.